It's your story and you're sticking to it. Okay.
I just realized by getting up to turn my light on, I showed everyone that I'm in shorts and a t-shirt this morning. And I'd like to come to all the meetings in shorts and a t-shirt if that's okay.
No, can't, Tracy, can't tell. Didn't have to let us know. You added yourself.
I have to turn my light on, and then I thought,
just slightly below the neck up. Can't tell it's a t-shirt. Can't even see the shorts.
It is a Kansas City Royals t-shirt, if that helps.
So now you can. But only when you straighten up. I mean, I'm telling you, you outed yourself.
I'm getting
there
used
was some woman, we got on some call and this woman goes, I'm going to confess, on one of these calls, it was shorts below the desk, and I'm going, one call, shorts below the desk. There's a lot worse going on than that. I can promise you.
Okay, it's 10 o'clock, and I'll turn it over to the mayor, I believe, and then I'll take roll if that's appropriate.
Mayor, would you like to call the meeting to order? Mayor, would you like to call the meeting to order?
Mr. Mayor, can you hear us okay?
Don, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and call the meeting to order if you would, please.
Okay. Let's call this meeting to order. The North Kansas City Police and Fire Pension Board Fund. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go around and take a roll call as we're doing this meeting remotely. I'll start with Chief Hargis.
Here.
Is Chief Beamer present?
Chief Freeman.
Chief Freeman is. Sorry. I have it all written out. I have Zoom fright. It's a weird thing. Mike Fisher.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mayor is present. Is Aaron Basore?
Here.
Is Aaron present? Okay, thank you. David Silvers?
You're muted, David.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much. And is Mr. Anthony Bologna?
You're muted, Anthony.
There we go. I was trying to figure out how to unmute. There we go. I'm here.
All right, great, excellent. Okay, all are present and accounted for. So we can start in looking to our agenda. So I'll turn it back over to the mayor for approval of the minutes.
The motion to approve the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes as from the meeting of May 12, 2020.
Second.
Thank
Call
you.
roll.
Call a roll for approval, please, Kate.
Oh, Chief Hargis for approval.
Yes.
Mike Fisher for approval.
Yes.
Anthony.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Barry, do you want to give our current market and fund performance review at this time?
I am ready to go. Should I share screen with that? Well, maybe, can you do the share screen for me? Because I've got notes too, and I need to kind of look at both. Is that possible?
Yeah, I'll share the screen.
All right. So go to page 4 of our report, and I will start with the general overview. So generally speaking, it was a great quarter for us. I'm like so happy with our numbers. I will get to those in a minute, but I think in that regard, we're in right now a really good place. COVID is going to flare up, I'm convinced, for the balance of the year. We haven't reacted to it, I don't think, in a very intelligent way as a country. There are places that have done better than other places, but trying to figure out what to do about education is a genuinely complex problem, and we just don't have any coordinated national policy. We've already had flare-ups in a handful of the schools that have opened. You've seen what's happened with some of the professional sports teams. Given the right environment, this thing will spread like wildfire. And so I just think, we're going to have open and close and open and close and backwards and forwards and 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And that's just kind of the way it's going to be. Having said that, we are going to get, we probably passed the worst of it economically. The economy declined by a record nearly 33% in the second quarter. The third quarter, there'll be a second revision and then a final number to come out at the end of the next 2 months, but it's going to be like around then. That was the biggest decline in history, although it wasn't as much as some people had feared at one point because of fiscal stimulus. The economy has probably already out of recession and growing a little bit. The third quarter number is likely to be positive. And as I've been telling people, it's going to be spun by each political party. The Democrats will say, we're not going to get back to where we were until 2021, maybe 2022. And the Republicans will say, the economy has turned around, look at what we've done. And both of those statements will be true. And then the election will be what it will be. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you about that. You've probably heard more than you want to hear about it already. So that's kind of where the economy is. In terms of the market right now is expensive, but there is a point of view that it is going to go up anyway. It is a minority point of view, but I think it's the one that I subscribe to. There's a lot of money on the sidelines. Stocks are expensive relative to their history, but they are cheap relative to bonds. There's really no place else to put money. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the market is going to continue to go up for the balance of this year. So I wouldn't, pull anything in, but the market, is relatively expensive right now on a PE basis, a price to earnings basis. Are there any questions about either the COVID situation, the economy, or the market before I go on to our returns? Okay, hearing none. Let's try, I think, page 8. Keep going, one more. Page 9. I lied. Stop. Okay. So we made 14% in the quarter, ranked in the 23rd percentile. In the last quarter, if you remember, we lost 14%, exactly the same amount to the first decimal place, and ranked in the, I think, 65th percentile. So we are a reasonably, this is not a bad stress test. It's not perfect because this decline was unusual in the sense it was so sharp and so fast. It went down very quickly and up very quickly, but we did pretty well. We have a slightly more aggressive than average portfolio based on these numbers. We lost slightly more than average in the down market, but when the market came back, we got it back, and the volatility wasn't terrible. We ranked in the 65th percentile last quarter, but we didn't rank in the 85th percentile. So I was pretty happy with that. If you look down the line at our various pieces, we only have 2 active managers, Baylord and Johnson. Baylord underperformed by just a smidgen. There is a lot going on in real estate right now. Needless to say, there is concern about the Amazon effect on retail. Baylord fortunately did not buy any of its retail properties. It does have 3 retail properties, but only one of them is a pure retail property. I think the other 2 are things like retail on the first level and housing on the second, third level. And the one that they did buy, they bought like 3 years ago when the Amazon effect was well known, and they felt like it could be remerchandised and they could make good money on it, even in this environment. Office space is obviously a question. I've listened to, I can't tell you how many calls about office space. It has been sliced and diced, businesses, this many people aren't going to go back. Businesses are going to want more space per employee. The space configurations are going to change. People are not going to go to the center cities as much. They're going to go to the more outward areas, and on and on and on. And I don't know really what to make of all that. My big surprise is that retail is not down more. In the last decline in 2010, this kind of real estate didn't go down in 2008, but in 2009, 2010, it plummeted. And I mean like high teens kind of numbers, -17, never -18. And that just hasn't happened this time. I think there may be more write-downs to come, but the fact that Baylord underperformed, they were -1.9 versus -1.6 is to me inconsequential. That kind of depends on how aggressively you took the write-downs on your properties. I think they're pretty well positioned. I'm not, if I couldn't be in real estate at this moment, I probably wouldn't be, but I think they are a good place to be. And once we get through that, moving to bonds just don't have much in the way of return prospects. So I think the fact that we're in real estate is probably a good thing. Johnson did an astonishingly good job. Now, you might look at this, they were 3.1 versus 2.9, so they beat their benchmark. You might look at this 82nd percentile number and say, well, they didn't do well relative to their peers, but not if you look at the first quarter. They were in, I think, the 10th percentile in the first quarter. They beat the benchmark by a full point. It is one thing to beat the benchmark in a down quarter. It is one thing to beat the benchmark in an up quarter, but it is quite something else to beat it in both quarters, because bonds in markets like this are to some extent like stocks in reverse. If you own credit, which are loans to corporations, those investments tend to go down or certainly don't go up as much in an environment like we had in the first quarter. And then they soar in the second quarter. And Johnson managed to outperform in the first quarter because they were defensively positioned, and then repositioned their portfolio in the second quarter and did well in both. If you look at their rankings across the page, 20th, 17th, 11th, 6th on a since inception basis. I mean, and honestly, I wanted to hire the other manager when we had the finals. It wasn't a strong preference, but a slight preference for the other manager. And the board picked Johnson. Johnson has turned out for this period of time to be the best pick. So very happy with that. Our rankings across the top of the page could almost not be better. This is as simple, almost as simple a portfolio as you could get, but we've just done really well with it. And I think we're well positioned for the future. So that is everything I have to say about the portfolio. Any questions about that before I move on to a couple of other things? Hearing none. Rebalancing recommendation, because equity did so well. We rebalanced from fixed income into equity, as you know. The equity did well. We're now a little over allocated in equity and a little under allocated in bonds, and we also need to replenish cash. So I've sent a trade ticket to Kate to have Chief Hargis sign. It sells 600,000 of our mid and small cap domestic stocks and 250,000 of our domestic large cap stocks. All of that money goes into cash. And I then directed Chief Hargis to write an email to the custodian to move 600,000 from cash to Johnson, the bond manager. It just requires a single sentence in an email, I think. And once that money is raised from the sales, she will do that, and that will put the money with the bond manager. So I make that as a rebalancing recommendation. Are there any questions, but I think it would be best if we don't, I think strictly speaking, have to have a vote. I think we can rebalance to targets on an interim basis, but I think a vote might be a good thing.
I make a motion that we rebalance according to Barry's recommendations.
Second.
Kate, can you call the roll?
Oh, sure. I believe, Mike, that was you that seconded the motion?
Yes.
Okay, great. Mr. Mayor?
yes.
Okay. Aaron?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Anthony?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next point. We became aware of a security breach. This is not a security breach with you guys, but this is like emotionally for me, it's one of those situations where, you know, you're in a car and something happens and you think, oh my God, if not for this, I could have run over a pedestrian, hit another car, and whatever it happens to be. And it really scares you. And what you have to tell yourself is, don't be scared. This is a free lesson. All you have to do is learn from it. You didn't have to pay a dime for it. And that's where I put this under. So let me tell you what happened. A custodian or an administrator. So some people have a professional third-party administrator. This happened to be a Taft-Hartley fund. The administrator sent trade instructions to the custodial bank. The email was somehow rerouted and resent with a subtle alteration in the source email address. They added a second S to the name of the third-party administrator in the middle of the email address, which nobody would notice, and changed the wire instructions to a bank in Mexico. The custodian received the letter, but called the administrator because they have two-part verification, and also because the wire instructions to the custodial bank had been changed. They caught it. There was no money lost. But I mention this story because I think if we do not have two-step verification, when Kate goes to redeem that $600,000, $250,000, the custodial bank is selling it. It's going into the cash account. There's really not much that can go wrong there. But she is supposed to then turn around and call trade services. If that is not required by trade services in order to execute that, I think we'd like it to be. So when, Kate, you make that call, I think I would ask them, would you transact this if I didn't call you? If you're not calling them, I would call that number and set that up, because we don't want any money to move without there being verification of it to anybody. And the same thing with the Johnson transaction. If Hannah is not, Hannah John is the person who manages our account. She is the one to whom to send the email to move the money from the cash account to Johnson. Now, again, not a lot to go wrong there. It's going from our cash account to our Johnson account at the custodial bank. So it's not like Hannah's going to send it to an outside entity. So in that sense, in your account, there's not a lot to go wrong. But, you know, I don't know about you. I feel overwhelmed by cybersecurity. And I just think voice verification of all transactions is a smart thing to do to avoid something that we might not even be aware of. So I make that suggestion for what it's worth. Any questions about that? Okay, and my last question, just because I'm putting this on all my sheets and I want to be sure, our fiscal year is June, correct? Is that right?
You asking about the city's fiscal year?
I'm asking about the fiscal year for this portfolio, which I presume coincides with the city.
The city is October to October, Barry.
Okay, so this is also October. October, is that correct?
Yeah, the plan year is also 9/30, October 1.
Okay, all right, that's it. So fiscal year is October. I mentioned that because unfortunately, I should have given this before and ended on a dollop of good news. This is the only this is the only dollop of bad news. We've only made 4.1% now. In a year where we had the biggest market drop in 12 years, I think making 4.1% in the first 9 months, including that quarter, is pretty darn good. I would almost say lucky. But we're probably not going to make our, I don't know, we might. This last quarter is going along pretty well. But, you know, at the end of the day, we're trying to make our actuarial assumption. And, you know, it's going to be a push. But, you know, we may make it yet. So maybe that's not such a piece of bad news. That is the end of my report, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions for Barry?
Bob West, going back to Barry's comments about suggested protocols on our various monies and the different funds that we have. Just speaking for myself, I kind of sort of understood, and I'm not familiar with the precise protocols that occur. And I'm sure that Barry and Chief Hargis and Kate are much more familiar with those, but I don't know, it just seems it is a big point of concern. I know the scam emails that I've been receiving, it seems that the volume is picking up as Barry says, they make just real small nuances and addresses, and if you're not paying really close attention. But I don't know, I don't fancy myself whatsoever as a financial expert, but I do fancy myself as a big worrier. And he said that was a good analogy. That's a big worry. I'm inclined to suggest to the board that I don't know if we talk to each of these financial institutions a little in a bit more detail or more specifically, and see if they have protocols to suggest, and again, maybe what Barry's given us today is sufficient, but I would, just from your legal counsel point of view, would just like to make sure the board is doing everything it can do in a reasonably prudent fashion to have these bases covered now that you've raised the issue, Barry. So I'll be quiet for now. That's my primary point.
But let me say two things about that. Something occurred to me while I was talking. I think in the future, Kate should not act on any email instructions from me unless I call her. I will call her and either talk to her in person or leave her a voicemail. She knows the sound of my voice. I don't think that you know, anybody's going to be able to get around that, at least for now. So I will give her voice verification. So that's number one. Number two, when she sends trade tickets in to either buy or sell things into trade services, there is an area on the form that says, please contact trade services to verify. The only thing we have to do to secure that in the manner I suggested is make sure trade services at the bank won't act unless they receive that verification, and then just to remind Kate to do it. And she can do that when she does this trade ticket this time, and that takes care of that. That only leaves her dealings with the custodial bank, and what I'm suggesting is that we have a conversation with Hannah about how best to do that. But I'm thinking that for money to move in the account, there needs to be some kind of voice verification on her end. So for instance, we're going to send her an instruction to move money to Johnson. She needs to call and say, is this your email? Now, what is there to go wrong? It's all within the bank, within our account. So there's no real reason to send it. But like I say, just to be certain, and to have a protocol. If we had two outside vendors, for instance, we could send money from one vendor to another vendor. And that's actually what happened in this other situation. Somebody got in that transaction and tried to send it someplace else. That's where the problem was. So I think if we just do those three things, we will be covered without going to a lot of additional work. And I'm happy to write that out in an email and send it to Kate so that she can be certain of what those instructions are, if that would be helpful. And also, Tracy has been quiet throughout all this. actively solicit thoughts or suggestions from her, because I'm sure her firm has dealt with this as well. And before I forget, we actually at Dayhab had an email breach, and you are going to be getting a letter from that. We think that nothing was compromised, nothing bad happened. We fixed it, we changed passwords, but we did have an email breach, and there will be a letter to that extent, unrelated to this other problem.
Okay, is there any other questions for Barry?
Does that need to be made into a motion to do that?
I don't think so. I don't know. This is an attorney question. I don't even know why I'm talking. You know, I need to shut this phone off.
The only reason why I'm asking that is if it needs to be made into a motion to do that, I mean, we're going to do that on everything, which is fine with me. It ought to be across the board then.
I don't think it's a bad idea to put it in a motion, and I like Barry's offer to write up the procedures, and maybe that could be part of your motion, Mike, is to ask Barry Dayhab to confirm their recommended procedures in an email, certainly to Kate, but I think to the full board, so that we have a record of how we intend to go about this. So.
Well, let me just caution one thing about doing it like that. If you do that, and of course this is a Bob question, not me, so I will raise the question and let him answer. If you do that and you fail to do it and something goes wrong, it makes you guiltier.
Well, that's a two-edged sword, though. If we do, and that's why I'm so thankful that you've had the experience and you're raising it with us, and that's why I'm kind of coming back with my comments. It's besides what you said, is that we do show that we've reviewed the issue. We feel we've adopted reasonable and safe procedures. Here's our procedures. You think they're reasonable. I think they're reasonable. Tracy and her group think they're reasonable. We've talked to our financial institutions, which think they're reasonable. Now we document them. Then I think just the converse happens of the concern you raised, which is a good concern. But now we've looked at this issue. We've taken reasonable actions, and we followed our procedures. And so yes, if someone doesn't follow the procedures, it's a problem. But hopefully these are followable procedures, and they sound like they are. But we sure don't want to put anything in writing that we can't follow. There's no question about that, none whatsoever. But as long as we can follow the procedures, I think we're okay. And in better shape, much better shape.
Well, if that needs to be put into a motion, I'll make that motion. Kate, you can perfect it however it's supposed to be. But if we're going to go with those kind of precautions or procedures, I think it should be across the board on all of it.
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
Question. Is the motion to establish protocols for two-factor authentication on all transactions or all communications, or what are we talking about here?
I thought it was a transactions, wasn't it, Barry?
With all transactions, everything involved with moving money.
Yeah.
So does that sound like a good wording for your motion, Mike?
Say that again.
Does that sound like good wording for your motion?
Yes.
That you're moving to begin to establish protocols for two-factor authentication on any transactions?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Just a quick thought. Do you want to put a dollar limit on that, transactions over a certain amount, so that Kate's not having to do that with every $1,000 invoice she pays or something like that.
Well,
Yeah.
what would be a suggestion on that then?
Well,
I'll-
I didn't envision this. I mean, Tracy knows more about what's going on here than I do, but I didn't envision this having anything to do really with bill paying. I was just thinking about buying and selling securities and moving, basically what I do. But maybe there's no distinction there. So I should just shut up and let Tracy talk. I'm not sure what to do. No, I see what you're
I think
saying.
there could be a distinction. So, but I'll leave that to you and the board to decide what that should look like. I didn't want, listening to the phrasing of the motion, I didn't want Kate to be having to jump through 10 hoops for every.
Yeah, we don't want to do that because sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease. Why don't we put a phrase in the motion that says transactions involving investments of the portfolio or moving money in the portfolio? I'm not sure.
I'm good with that, however it needs to be phrased.
Or you could just put transactions over a certain dollar amount. Might cover.
Give me a dollar amount.
Kate, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree, Tracy. And we do have a very good process so far in just paying regular or standard invoices, such as your firm, where I have proper people signing off on that, whether it's Chief Freeman or Chief Hargis or David Silvers, so that we do have that protocol, and that's what everyone is reviewing on a quarterly basis, what type of fees we are paying. So I'm not quite sure what that dollar amount would be, but I do like that language of the transactions involving investments within the portfolio. I think that captures what we need to, and then you guys can decide on that dollar amount if need be.
That sounds like it got right to the point right there.
Oh, thanks.
See, I told you could perfect it.
Now we just need Barry to send us the language.
Right.
I'm working on it right now, actually. I'll have it done in another 5 minutes.
And then I'm just reiterating with the notes, just to verify I had this correctly. Mike Fisher proposed the motion, and I believe it was Chief Hargis seconded the motion. And so we're saying that all transactions will need an authentication, being involved, investments within the portfolio.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
You want to call the roll?
Yes, I'm taking the roll now. Let's see, we Mike Fisher.
Yes.
Chief Hargis.
Yes.
Anthony Bologna.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Chief Freeman.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
And David. Silver.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's everyone.
Okay, any more questions for Barry? Hearing none, we'll move on to the quarterly report and interim valuation from Tracy.
Okay. Kate, do you want to pull that up on this? Oh, yeah, we already did. This actually is a pretty short report with good news in it. This 2-page summary here shows the interim valuation that we did as of July 1. At the last board meeting, the concern with the markets was, what is this going to do to our valuation, and what might this do to the ongoing prospects of the funded status and contributions. If you flip over to page 2, you'll see that even measured as of July 1, even if we hold steady as of July 1 into the last quarter of the fiscal year, we're still sitting pretty comfortably with a contribution margin of almost $100,000. So if we can just kind of hold our own through the end of this fiscal year, we're going to be okay. We are going to dip maybe a little bit below 100% funded, but we're still going to be comfortably sitting where we need to be and kind of riding out this volatility in the markets. The main reason for that is because this plan implements what we call the actuarial smoothing method of valuing our assets, where we recognize gains and losses over a 4-year time period. And I said 4, is it 4 or 5? I can't remember off the top of my head. Is it 5? Thank you, Bindi. Over a 5-year time period. So any gain or any loss, we're only recognizing 20% per year. And what that does, it doesn't change the cost of the plan at all. It doesn't change the benefits in the plan. All it does is for budgeting purposes, it smooths the volatility in the markets. And so just looking at this interim valuation and kind of projecting it forward to what we expect to see in an October 1 valuation, what I expect to see is that smoothing method, which is it's a tool is all it is, but I expect to see it doing what it is intended to do, which is smoothing the volatility and not creating large spikes in contribution requirements or spikes or dips in funded status. So I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we went through this exercise. It puts my mind a little bit more at ease that you're not going to get any sort of big shock on October 1. So hopefully that gives the board some comfort as well. Can I answer any questions about it? That's it in a nutshell. I'm happy to talk more about it, but that's really, we went through this exercise at the request of the board, and I'm happy to report that I believe going forward into the last quarter that the plan is going to be still sitting very comfortably.
And unfortunately, Eric Berlin was not able to be on this call, but he does have this document and he might have some other questions.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Sure. Yeah. Any questions after the meeting, feel free to shoot me an email.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yep, you bet. That's all I have for this quarter actuarially. I think Mindy's next up on the agenda to talk about the administration.
Mindy, are you ready to go on the quarterly report?
Yes. Can you bring it up, please?
Yes, I can. There we go.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. It's a quarterly plan administration report. For benefit calculations and return of contributions, we didn't have any return of contributions in the last 3 months, but we did prepare benefit illustrations for 2 members who are considering retiring. For retirements during the quarter, we had none, which is highly unusual. Our next confirmed retirement is in January of 2021. We didn't have any drop plan changes during the last 3 months. For additional services provided, sadly, we had a retiree who died at the end of June, and we worked with the custodian, U.S. Bank, to continue payments to his spouse in the form of a 50% joint survivor. On the federal and state surveys, we had both. We had the annual report that's due to the JCPER, and then we also had the quarterly report that we provided for the second quarter to the JCPER as well. For benefit payments during the last 3 months, we had $243,000 for each one of those months. For contributions, and this is through the July 24th payroll, for the city was right under $106,000, and for the employees was right under $48,000. Do you have any questions?
Okay, thank you, Mindy.
Sure.
Okay, next on the agenda is item number 6, consideration of plan amendment adding benefit options. Bob.
Thank you, Chief Hargis. And there's the document. So I worried all night about being able to document share, and I don't even have to do it. So that's great. So, speaking of worry. So the packet that I sent to the board late last week and that you're looking at today is basically the same packet that presented to the City Council. At least this is the last format when we went through this amendment process before that would be submitted for the City Council's review and approval once this board approves the recommendation of the amendment. So as we walk through this, there may be some issues that you do or you don't want in this. But in its simplest form, these are the new alternative forms of benefit that would be offered to the participants if you choose to approve them. The summary that's on the screen right now is probably the best place to start. And again, this would be the same summary that would be presented to the council. And I'd start with the 2.64140, the alternative forms of benefit, and then we'll come back up to that definition because that kind of ties in with that. But I think it's easier to look at the alternative forms of benefit first, and so you can see the new benefits, and then give you the reason as to the proposal that the actuarial equivalent definition be changed at the same time. So in the second bullet under 264.140, you'll see there's 2 additional forms of survivorship options being added. So in addition to right now, you have a joint 50%, there's a joint at 75%, and the joint and 100% options that are being added. The third bullet is add new what's called period certain options, where there's a minimum guaranteed period of time that monthly benefits are to be paid to the member, and that would be 5, 10, or 15 years, whichever the member elects. And then there is really the final form is in the next to last bullet, which is adding the partial lump sum payment option with the acronym of PLOP. It creates a new subsection that provides that a member may elect 25% of the member's benefit in the form of a single lump sum payment, and then the member would choose among the other benefit options, all of the ones listed above, for the remaining 75%. That last bullet, the pop-up option, so that the pop-up is different from the plot, but with the pop-up option, it would be to clarify that can apply to the existing 50% and will also apply to the new 75% and 100% survivorship options. So this might be a good time then to bounce back up to the definitional change on actuarial equivalent. When I sent the language for these new benefits over to Tracy and received her input on it and questions about it, I think it was Tracy's suggestion, which would seem to me to be a reasonable suggestion and a good recommendation, is that while this process is being done, that the actuarial equivalent definition, which includes a pension mortality table, that be updated from the existing 1984 table to what's called the 2010 Public Safety Static Mortality Table for healthy male annuitants for the participant mortality and corresponding female contingent survivor mortality for the spouse mortality. I believe the definition of actuarial equivalent affects each of these different forms of benefit. So let me defer to, if I could defer to Tracy right now to give further input. This is really certainly much more in her department, and give more input as to the change and updating this table and how what the effect that might have on these different benefit elections. So Tracy, can you mind weighing in on that?
Yeah, sure. My thought is that we need to update the mortality table. I don't think we can justify using 1984 mortality anymore. And when it comes to changing from one monthly annuity form to another monthly annuity form, as we've done in the past, the mortality doesn't have as significant of an impact on those calculations. So, I mean, I would have brought it up anyway, but I wouldn't be really pounding my fist too much. It's really, now that we are introducing the possibility of a lump sum option or a partial lump sum option, now the mortality table plays a more significant role. And using an old mortality table, we really can't justify doing that anymore. So I do want to see us update that mortality table to something more recent. There's literally hundreds of options that we could choose from to do this. I chose one that Bob has outlined here in his summary. To be honest, I'm not 100% thinking that's the best one for us to choose. The thing that I don't like about it is using male mortality for the participants and female mortality for the spouses. We would be doing that even if we had a female police officer with a male spouse. And maybe that's not going to come up very often, but it could come up. And so this is one option to use. But another option would be, and I apologize, Bob, I should have kind of given you a heads up about this going into this meeting, but another option would be to essentially create another unisex table by combining those mortalities. And then that way we would be using the same mortality for participants and spouses blended to make it more consistent across the board. Does that make sense?
Well, speaking for myself, it does. I on this piece, I'm just going as instructed by the actuary. So
yeah, you have my initial suggestion, and the more I've thought about that initial suggestion, I'd kind of like to tweak it just a little bit to make it a little bit more unisex, if that's all right.
Yeah, we can certainly make that change, and I can revise it. I guess, Chief or Mayor, maybe can we look at one more thing, and I'll come back to this as to what the next steps would be. Chief, if you would go to the next page, yeah, right there. I just wanted to touch on that so that these are the changes that will be made to these two sections. So if any of the board hasn't had a chance to look at it yet, this gives you the red line version. You can see how the actuarial equivalent definition, where it's at right now, how that would be changed. And if we change the reference per Tracy's suggestion today, then that's fine as well. Again, that's up to the board on that. And then you'll see the alternative forms of benefits where we change the 50% to 75 to 100. Subsection C then is adding the period certain, where you'll see the 5, 10, or 15 years. That's kind of a guaranteed monthly income with remaining benefits paid to the beneficiary. D is the new plot. And E is making clear that the pop-up applies to all of the joint survivor options. So that kind of gives you the sections, what's being added, what's being revised. C and D are completely new. The others are just revisions to add the other pieces. And then, Chief, if you one last thing, then the next couple of pages are just a clean copy of what the language in those two sections will look like. And then if you'll scroll on down, Chief, to the next document, one more page, that's the form of ordinance that will present to the council. And once we get this language finalized, and that basically that's just cut and pasted in there what you've seen in the prior documents. So once the board decides what it wants to do with, I guess you have two issues before you. Are these the alternative forms of benefits that you were wanting to see, number one? And do you want to update that actuarial equivalent definition to what Tracy's recommending? So, and use perhaps this table that she's mentioned today. So, and then you can, after you've had a chance to discuss it and make a motion as to what you want to approve or not approve, then we can come up with how we want to take it to the city council. So Chief, I'll send it back to you or the mayor. And
does the board have any discussion on the proposals before you?
I have a question for Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about potentially not liking this 2010 public safety mortality table and combining it. Are you creating something new, or is there something already established that you're looking to suggest to us?
Well, I mean, honestly, we can go with it as Bob has it written. He wrote this on my initial recommendation, so I don't necessarily have a problem with the way this is written. The only thing about it is that it assumes that all of the participants are male and all of the spouses are female. And so, which is probably true most of the time. But in the event that that's not true, then the mortality is a little bit off, which again, maybe that's an issue. Maybe it's not even something that we necessarily happens often enough that it needs to be addressed here. But one of the ways that we could tweak this is to say that, for example, the mortality table for the annuitants would be a blended table using, let's say, 90% male mortality, 10% female. And then the contingent mortality would be 90% female, 10% male. And we could blend those into unisex tables to make them a little bit more accurate going forward. And maybe I'm just getting a little bit too technical about it.
I guess that's my question. It sounds like, are we inventing the wheel here and making something our own? Or are we going off of something that's established already as proper protocols on mortality tables? Because Chief Hargis and I discussed this last week a little bit, that, yeah, we need to update it from 1984 for sure. Obviously, people are living longer, but cops and firemen, maybe not so much.
Right. So
we want to stay in the public safety realm for our mortality tables, but we do want it to be updated and accurate.
Right. And these are published tables. And what I'm suggesting as a potential tweak is that we use these exact same tables, but that we create unisex tables from them, which is it's a fairly common thing to do, particularly when we're talking about paying lump sums. And again, if we weren't talking about paying lump sums, to be honest, I wouldn't care what mortality we used. It wouldn't really matter much. It's when we go to make lump sum payments that mortality really matters. And so that's really the only reason I'm kind of getting a little bit more into the weeds with it to get something that we're happy with, that we don't have to, that will last us hopefully another decade or two in doing these calculations.
So would you be able to suggest the wording changes back to the board and Bob here within the next couple of days?
Absolutely. Yep, I can do that. And then again, I mean, I can suggest an alternative, and then the board can choose either the way Bob has it written, which was my initial recommendation, or a more technical way of doing it.
With the timeline set in place about trying to get this on the next council agenda, and not the board obviously not meeting between now and then, can we agree on the changes that are proposed right now from Bob, with the exception of potentially altering 264.020 and coming back to maybe an email vote? That's probably more of a legal question for Bob.
Yes, I think that can be done, and I think the state procedures permit that, and even to cover it more definitively now, if the board is generally amenable to Tracy's revised suggestion with this, that could be included in the motion, and then she does the language. Or gives me some language to work with, and then we put that in a final form that we'll distribute for review and final approval.
I've got a question for Bob and Tracy, kind of both. This blended table that you're going to put together, is it based off the 2010 table that's listed here?
Yes, it is.
So do we, as long as you're basing your calculations off of the 2010 table, do we need to add that extra language in there? Is it even necessary to be in our ordinance as long as you're basing the calculations off of that table?
Well, potentially, I mean, if we wanted to button this up today, we could potentially just say that we're going to update the mortality table from the existing 84 unisex pension to the 2010 public safety static mortality tables, period. You could just end the amendment there, and then as a matter of administrative practice, we could create the tables that we want from those 2010 public safety static tables. Or am I stretching it, Bob?
No, that would seem to work to me. I mean, if you're going to use that 2010 public safety static mortality table, and then you utilize the population of the North Kansas City Police and Fire Department, that seems like that's exactly what you should do, really. So now that we've thought this through more, so.
Okay, then maybe that would allow you to kind of button up the amendment today, and then as a matter of administrative practice, we can lay out exactly how we're going to apply those tables to our calculations.
I'm good with that.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the proposed changes and legal comments to the amendment of North Kansas City Police and Firefighters Retirement Fund with the amendment of the removal of suggested by Tracy. Does that work, Bob?
Yes, I think that works just fine.
I'll second Chief Hargis' motion.
And that was Kevin.
Yes.
Okay. And I'll go ahead and take roll. Mayor?
Yes.
Anthony?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
David Silvers?
Yes.
Mike Fisher?
Yes.
And Chief Hargis?
Yes. And Bob, could you get those amended documents over to me when you get finished?
You're on mute, Bob.
Bob, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. I will send those to you, and but to clarify, I don't think so. I'm going on the basis that we don't need a further approval from the full board, although I can send the full board the final package that'll be per the motion that was made.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, any other questions about the benefit changes? Okay, any other comments or businesses we need to talk about today? Okay, Mr. Mayor, would you like to make a motion for adjournment?
Have we got a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
This is Barry. Let me ask one thing before we all go. Well, actually, let me ask two things. First thing is there a likelihood we will be doing a remote meeting in November?
I think there's probably a likelihood.
Okay, second question. How do you all feel about these meetings, about Zoom meetings generally? Do you find them convenient? Do you find them annoying? Do you feel like you're getting the information well enough to make decisions? We're all trying to think through whether we should work differently or whether the goal should be to go back to what was normal.
Right now, we probably have to move where we're having the meetings to meet with our county and city ordinances on social distancing. So it's all just going to depend on how things roll with the health department recommendations going forward.
But I mean, if there were no COVID, would you consider doing business differently?
No.
Okay, Don's weighed in. How about the rest of you?
I like face-to-face meetings. I don't mind Zoom. It's nice to wear my t-shirt and shorts to a meeting, but I miss seeing everybody in person.
Chief Hargis?
With the ones like this that are quarterly meetings, it's a little better for the Zoom. I sometimes get zoomed out during the week on other things, but for what we're doing, I think it's a good platform, and I don't know that we've missed out on any information getting. So I'm good with either way. Sometimes it's more convenient for the Zoom, so you don't have to drive somewhere or travel, but it's what we have right now. So, and it might be available for you in the future if you can't travel in, that we can put you up on a screen in front of the rest of us when we're meeting in person, or look at some changes that way. But I would like to go back to normal at some point as well.
Hey, listen, if Tracy's coming, I'm coming. That's all I'm going to tell you. Thank you all. That's it. I don't want to keep you any longer.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thank you.